and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I am here to share my Jane Austen July TBR for 2023. So it is finally that most wonderful time of year besides October, which is Jane Austen July. This is one of those annual readathons that I really look forward to all year long and then can't wait to indulge in all the themed books for the entire month. So I'm really grateful to the three co-hosts this year, Katie from Books and Things, Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and Claudia from Spinster's Library for their time putting together this readathon. And I have a lot of Jane Austen books and Jane Austen related books that I'm excited to read over the next month. These are the ones that I have physically, and then I have lots that I'm going to be listening to on audiobook or reading digitally. This year I've gone for a bit of a Sense and Sensibility themed Jane Austen July, so I think you'll see that kind of common thread woven throughout quite a few of my picks. So the first prompt is to read one of Jane Austen's main 6 novels, and this year I'm going to be rereading Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. This will be my 3rd time reading Sense and Sensibility, and I absolutely love Sense and Sensibility. It's one of my favorite Jane Austen books. I think it's number 2 after Pride and Prejudice, so it's like one of my most beloved Jane Austen books. It's actually the first of her main 6 novels that I ever read, so this was not my introduction to the world of Jane, because I had already loved watching film adaptations, but this is my introduction to reading Jane, so I have like a soft spot for it because of that. And I just love the sister relationship in this book between Eleanor and Marian, and I think that's what keeps pulling at my heartstrings, even though for me the romances in this book aren't as convincing as some of her other romances. Although I do have this lovely cloth-bound classics edition, I am actually going to be listening to this on audiobook. I'm going to be listening to the Rosamund Pike narration for the first time. I listened to her Pride and Prejudice narration last year, and so I'm really excited to listen to Sense and Sensibility. The last 2 times I read it physically, so this will be my first time listening to Sense and Sensibility, and I'm really excited to be back in their beautiful little cottage and experiencing life with the Dashwoods. And then the second prompt is to read something by Jane Austen that isn't one of her main 6 novels, and for that I'm going to be following along with the group read-along of Jane Austen's Juvenalia. I think most, if not all, of the pieces selected to be part of the group read-along are contained in this bind-up that's part of my Penguin Cloth-Bound Classics edition. Not all of this is her Juvenalia, because it also contains a lot of notes and Lady Susan, so I think this much of it is the Juvenalia, and then this is the Lady Susan and the footnotes. So it's got quite a lot of her Juvenalia, and I've only read a few pieces of it. I know I've read for sure her History of England, and then I think last year I read maybe Henry and Eliza. I read one of those like paired name versions, but other than that I haven't explored her Juvenalia very much, so I'm looking forward to following along with the group read schedule. Then prompt number 3 is to read a nonfiction about Jane Austen or about her time period. And for this, I'm reading a book that I discovered at my library last Jane Austen July and didn't have time to get to, and so I've been thinking about it for an entire year and I can't wait to dive in. And that is Jane and Dorothy, A True Tale of Sense and Sensibility, The Lives of Jane Austen and Dorothy Wordsworth by Marian Veevers. And this is a biography that kind of compares and contrasts the life of Jane Austen with the life of Dorothy Wordsworth, which sounds absolutely fascinating. So I'll read a little bit from the flap here. So it says, Jane Austen and Dorothy Wordsworth were born just 4 years apart in a world torn between heady revolutionary ideas and fierce conservatism, but their lives have never been examined together before. They both lived in Georgian England, navigating strict social conventions and new ideals, and they were both influenced by Dorothy's brother, the romantic poet William Wordsworth, and his coterie. They were both supremely talented writers, yet often lacked the necessary peace of mind in their search for self-expression. Neither ever married. Jane and Dorothy uses each life to illuminate the other. For both women, financial security was paramount, and whereas Jane Austen hoped to achieve this through her writing rather than being dependent on her family, Dorothy made the opposite choice and put her creative powers to the use of her brilliant brother, with whom she lived all her adult life. Though neither path would bring lasting fulfillment and independence, both women's mark on literary culture is undeniable. So I think it'll be really interesting to compare Jane Austen's life. Now that I've read a few biographies of her during previous Jane Austen July, I feel like I have kind of a grip on what happened in Jane Austen's life, but I don't know very much about Dorothy Wordsworth, so I'm interested in seeing kind of how these two women who are active in the literary world at the same time, how their lives compare and contrast. And of course, I'm intrigued by the fact that it uses the subtitle A True Tale of Sense and Sensibility. I'm very curious who is Sense and who is Sensibility among this pair. I tend to think that Jane Austen would be Sense and Dorothy Wordsworth would be Sensibility, but I might be completely wrong. So I'm very curious to see if the author pairs each woman with one of those two traits, and I'm looking forward to reading Jane and Dorothy and getting kind of a new perspective on Jane's life and learning more about Dorothy Wordsworth. Then the fourth prompt is to read a retelling of one of Jane Austen's works or a work of historical fiction set in her time period, and I have 3 titles that I would love to get to for this prompt. My highest priority read for this prompt is The Year in Between, a Sense and Sensibility variation by Christina Morland, and this book bills itself as telling the untold tale in that missing year in the final chapter of Sense and Sensibility. And I'm really hoping this book is going to make me fall in love with the romantic relationships in Sense and Sensibility as much as I love the familial relationships, because I've heard that it really develops particularly Marian and Colonel Brandon's relationship more deeply, because we kind of see their courtship over the year between Marianne still being quite heartbroken over Willoughby and then getting married to Colonel Brandon. So I'm really looking forward to seeing a little bit more depth to that relationship that's missing from the ending of Sense and Sensibility. And then we also get to see Eleanor and Edward's first year of marriage, which I think will be really sweet because they are a sweet couple, but they don't get very much page time actually together in the book. So I think it will be neat to see a little bit more of their relationship dynamic unfolding in this book. Then I couldn't help but throw in a Pride and Prejudice retelling, and that is P.D. James' Death Comes to Pemberley. This is an edition that I picked up at a recent library book sale, and I just think the cover is just absolutely stunning. That kind of like misty morning with the lush greenery of Pemberley and then the ominous carriage approaching. This is, I think, one of those Pride and Prejudice retellings that I hear about a lot, but I have never picked up. And so I'm excited to have a mystery to tackle during Jane Austen July. And this book is set during 1803, when Darcy and Elizabeth have been married for 6 years, and their life is fairly settled and content, and they are entertaining a group of guests when a chaise appears rocking down the path from Pemberley's wild woodland, and as it pulls up, Lydia Wickham, an uninvited guest, tumbles out screaming that her husband has been murdered. So I think it will be highly satisfying. It seems like Wickham is always fated to be the murderee during Austen-themed murder mysteries. I read The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray during last year's Cloak and Dagger Christmas, but that was definitely a book that kind of mashed together the Jane Austen universe, because pretty much characters from all of her books were present at that party, whereas this is kind of more of a true-to-life Pride and Prejudice retelling that just has the characters of Pride and Prejudice. And P.D. James, her picture's on the back cover. P.D. James is a very well-known mystery writer, and so it's not like this is a Jane Austen retelling with a little bit of mystery thrown in. It's like this is a dedicated mystery author who's just using Jane Austen's characters and setting for well-written mystery. So I think this will be thoroughly enjoyable and kind of a break from more of the traditional Regency books that I'm planning to read this month. And then lastly, and this is a book that I might pick up if I have time, but if I don't, I won't be too sad about, and that is Marian by Daphne du Maurier. If you've seen like any of my videos since I first read Rebecca last January, I feel like you'll know that I am having a love affair with Daphne du Maurier's writing and her books recently, and I've been trying to really pace myself so I don't read through her entire catalog, but I read My Cousin Rachel in January and gave it 5 stars, and then I read The King's General in June this year and gave it 5 stars, so I am 3 for 3 for 5-star du Maurier reads. And so when I saw that she had a book set in the Georgian/Regency era, I just couldn't help myself from putting it as a potential read on this Jane Austen July TBR. So if I get through the rest of the books that I have slated for the month, This will be one that I would love to pick up, and there is an audiobook edition on Audible that I'm planning to listen to. This book is based off of a true story of one of du Maurier's ancestors, which I think is a really fun writing trope that she kind of incorporates into a lot of her historical fiction. So the blurb on Goodreads says, "A vivid portrait of overweening ambition, Marian is set during the Napoleonic Wars and based on du Maurier's own great-great-grandmother. In Regency London, the only way for a woman to succeed is to beat men at their own game. So when Marian Clark seeks an escape from her squalid surroundings in Bowling Inn Alley, she ventures first into the scurrilous world of the pamphleteers. Her personal charms are such, however, that before long she comes to the notice of the Duke of York. With her taste for luxury and power, Marian, now a royal mistress, must aim higher. Her lofty connections allow her to establish a thriving trade in military commissions, provoking a scandal that rocks the government and brings personal disgrace." So I think that sounds absolutely fascinating, and it would be interesting to read a book that is set more in like the upper echelons of the high elite during the time period. This sounds like it'll have a lot of royal court intrigue and drama, whereas a lot of the books that I have read set in the Regency era up to this point have kind of followed the Jane Austen model of being very pastoral and set in the countryside. So reading something that is set in the heart of London with du Maurier's incredibly evocative Gothic writing sounds like it would be an absolute treat. So then prompt number 5 is to read a work by a contemporary of Jane Austen, so something written or published between 1775 and 1817. And for this, I'm again returning to kind of my Sense and Sensibility themed year, and I'm going back to Jane and Dorothy, and I'm going to be reading some of the writings of Dorothy Wordsworth. So I'm planning to pick up Dorothy Wordsworth's Grasmere journals, which she wrote between 1800 and 1803 while she was living in the Lakes District at Dove Cottage. And I have been fortunate enough to visit the Lakes District and to tour Dove Cottage, so I have a really clear mental image of that house and the setting. But as I mentioned when talking about Jane and Dorothy, I don't know a ton about Dorothy Wordsworth because obviously she has been eclipsed in popular memory by her brother William Wordsworth. So I think reading about that place and that time period from Dorothy's perspective is going to be really enriching. It says on Goodreads that this is perhaps the best loved of all journals, which is very high praise. It says, "Noting the walks and the weather, the friends, country neighbors, and beggars on the roads, William Wordsworth's marriage, the composition of poetry, and their concern for Coleridge, her words bring those first years to vivid and intimate life." I think reading people's journals or letters is such a unique way to get to know about a time period because people include so many details about just slices of daily life and aspects of their day-to-day routines and surroundings that maybe they wouldn't think to even mention in kind of broader summaries of a time period. So I think this is going to be really fascinating and give me a broader appreciation for the time period of the Romantic poets, and maybe give me a little bit more understanding for Marian and why she was so influenced by those types of poets in Sense and Sensibility. So those are all the books that I'm hoping to read in Jane Austen July, and then there's always 2 watching prompts. So prompt 6, the first watching prompt, is to watch a direct screen adaptation of one of Jane Austen's works. And for this, I'm again returning to my Sense and Sensibility themed year, and I am planning to watch Sense and Sensibility. I have traditionally watched and loved primarily the 2008 miniseries version of Sense and Sensibility, so this year I am planning to go back and watch the 90s movie adaptation with Emma Thompson and Kate Winslet. And I don't think I've watched that movie adaptation in probably like 15 years because I just love the miniseries so much. So I'm looking forward to going back and re-experiencing it in the movie format. And of course it wouldn't be Jane Austen July if I didn't rewatch the 2005 Pride and Prejudice at some point. So I'll probably be watching that within the first couple days of Jane Austen July because that is just one of my all-time favorite movies. It's such a comfort watch to me, and I just love rewatching it many times a year, including in Jane Austen July. And then the 7th prompt is the one watching prompt that I struggle with every year, and that is to watch a modern screen retelling of a Jane Austen book, and I don't really have any plans for this prompt yet. We'll see if I do end up getting inspired to pick up a modern Jane Austen retelling, but at this point there's none on the top of my mind that I'm interested in watching, so as usual I might be skipping this prompt. So those are my picks for Jane Austen July. I am really excited. I'm looking forward to having a more Sense and Sensibility themed year this year, because the last few Jane Austen Julys I've been reading Pride and Prejudice retellings, and I think actually this is going to be my first Austen retelling that's not Pride and Prejudice related. So that's really exciting. I'm branching out into a whole new world of Jane Austen retellings, and I think it's going to be a really fun reading month. So I hope if you're participating in Jane Austen July, you also have a stack of books that you are excited to get to, and until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book.